Well, hello everybody. I would like to introduce Wouter to you. I'm pretty sure he will share something more about him and his family and what kind of journey God took him on over the last couple of years. But I will introduce him as a very nice guy, a good friend of us, and the relationship between us and the church is really strengthened over the last couple of years. I think God took him on an extraordinary journey, which is very inspiring, and I'm pretty sure you will all be encouraged on courage in church planting, because you will need a lot of courage about it, don't you?
Yeah.
So he's a great friend of us. Ment also did a lot of relational things with us as a church as well, and we're really growing into deeper relationships where I'm very grateful of. So please give him an applause and welcome.
Thank you. Let's take a moment to pray together, and then we'll dive straight in. Jesus, we thank you that you have promised to build your church, and that the gates of hell will not prevail against it. And Jesus, we pray that you will come and renew your church in Europe. We pray that there will be many men and women who will be raised up to come and give heed to your call. We pray that you will restore the beauty of the church, the influence of the church, the strength of the church in Europe. We pray that you will come and renew your beautiful bride in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. Well, it's very special to be here with you. As Allard said, I'm Wouter. I'm originally Dutch, then moved to the UK, lived 15 years in the UK, led a church there, and this year moved back to my own country, the Netherlands. And we have this little weird dynamic going on in my family. I have 4 daughters who have all been born in the UK. My wife is originally from the Netherlands. And we have moved back home, but my daughters have moved abroad. And somehow we're trying to figure that out. Our sort of default language has switched to English since we've adopted a little girl in England. And now you have this weird dynamic of Dutch and English all merged together. But we're loving it. And we have found some new friends in the Netherlands, which is really great. We planted a church in Nijmegen with relational mission. So it's one of the other New Frontier spheres, one of the 22, I think I heard this morning. It keeps growing. And we started to make some new friends when we were in the Netherlands. I don't know how that works out in the parts of the world where you're from, but in the Netherlands, the whole multiplication to spheres has worked out a little awkward. We're only a tiny, small country. We have about 17 New Frontiers churches, and they've all been chopped in 4 different spheres. So it's a bit weird when you're sort of an hour down the road, but you're part of a different family of churches. So it's been really special to get to know some new friends. So I've got to know Jan Willem and Allard here in Utrecht, who've warmly welcomed us. Chris Taylor in The Hague, Matt in Amsterdam. And together we've been trying to sort of scoop things a little bit together to do together more than we could do apart. I think that's the strapline that New Frontiers started with. And that's still true, even when we work across different spheres together. So I just want to tell you a little bit of my story, and hopefully that will inspire you where you are. I have a real passion for church planting, but for churches in general to be renewed in Europe. As you look around the state in the church in Europe, we can all agree it's not what it used to be, and it's not what it will be. And we find ourselves in the middle, and we want to hear God's voice and call, and want to see the church restored. Now, I can only tell you a little bit of our journey in that process, but hopefully it will inspire you, give you faith, and start to imagine what this could look like for us. I know that for you guys, Utrecht is kind of your bridgehead into Europe, and I pray that God will give you many, many more churches in the Netherlands, Germany, Belgium, all over Europe, just like you were praying around the room for all these different countries. Together, we can do more than apart. So I thought I'll start you off by introducing you to our church. This is our church called Novio. We're based in Nijmegen, just about an hour down the road towards Germany. So if you're staying for a little bit longer, you can come and have a visit if you like. This is our team. We have a wonderful team moved from all different corners of the world to come and help us plant Nijmegen last year. So, as I said, my family moved over from the UK. Right hand next to that, we have Alk and Beverly, who've moved from the States to come and join us, felt God's call to come and support us. Then bottom left, we have Ben and Mika. They're from a church in Colchester. They've moved over last year. And then right hand, we have Joel and Femke and their family, who are from the Netherlands. So between us, we're trying to work out how to plant a church that is American, Dutch, English. Ben's half Canadian, Mika is half Chinese, half Australian, and we bring all of these cultures together. And I'm going to tell you a little bit of our story so far, and particularly on the lessons that we've drawn out. And in the meantime, I'm going to throw you out some questions to think about what that could look like in your context. So, as all good church plants, it kind of starts with people, right? Without people, there's no church. I don't know about you, but we all find ourselves on this strange trajectory in life when we've found God and where we've ended up now. None of us could really predict what was going to happen, right? I think most of us find ourselves in places we would have never imagined to be. Certainly I wouldn't have. And I think God's journey with people is just beautiful. Now, our church is only just started. We launched in May, and God has been bringing us all sorts of people from all across the world and the Netherlands. And I love hearing their stories. When they come to church for the first time, I'm always keen to hear, what's your story? What's God been doing so far? And it's always different. You never meet two people with the same story. God has been at work right from the start in different ways. Well, for me, it started growing up in the Brethren Church. They gave me a very strong foundation in the Word. They were not so strong in the Spirit, so it kind of stayed like a pile of dry wood for a very long time for me. But when I was 18 and I joined a New Frontiers church, that whole pile was suddenly set aflame by the Spirit, and I was very grateful for my heritage. And it was from that moment that I started to imagine what church could look like. So I came from a Brethren church, very small, hardly any young people. I was very embarrassed to take anyone to church. And I walked into this New Frontiers church, and it was just wild, crazy, in the Netherlands. I'd never been to anything like it. I heard people praying in tongues and prophesying and preaching that I felt I could understand and do something with. I thought, this is a total new experience for me. I wish everyone could have an experience like this. From that church in Berkel, they planted out a little church in a town called Reewijk, near where we lived, in a city called Gouda. And we thought, hey, we're young, we're up for an exciting adventure. So 21, very young, we joined that church plant, and they just let us do anything. Leading the kids' work, preaching, leading worship, and we were just one pile of energy, but very little knowledge and no sort of foundation. So we thought, actually, it might be really helpful to do some training. So there was a great church in Norwich in the UK that said, come over, come and do an internship with us. So we went over for a gap year, and we were going to be there for 1 year. Famous last words. After that year, God spoke very clearly to us. He says, I've got more for you here to learn. There will come a day where I will call you back to the Netherlands. But until then, make yourselves available and learn. So that's what we did. We were the eternal interns for 4 years. We pretty much did everything. Homeless ministry, kids ministry, working in the kitchen, serving with a next site that started, and just made ourselves available. We didn't really have lots of quality, lots of gifting, but we loved the church, and we just worked. We worked hard. Everywhere we went, we just served. And God started to teach us things along the way. Now, along that way, he then started to guide us prophetically. He gave us prophetic words to give us direction in what we were learning. So after 4 years, we moved from Norwich to Peterborough, and I became an assistant pastor there, and we started serving the church again all over. It was a church that was sort of a restart. It was one big mess and needed lots of work, lots of love, lots of care. So we just learned how to love people, how to relay foundations, and then after about 6 years, the pastor there moved on, and he asked me if I wanted to take on leading the team. I said, no, I've seen how much hard work this involves. I don't think I want to do this. And then God had different plans, so he kept repeating his word again and again. So very reluctantly, after 3 times, I said, all right, God, I'll step into this, thinking everyone's going to discover I'm a big fraud. This is never going to work out. And to my surprise, God started to do some really beautiful things in me as well as in the church. And it was amazing just to see how God grew us little by little. I had to learn to become a leader in my own right, not to copy what other people do, and discover the gifting God had put in me, and just to lead in my own way. And one of the pictures that God gave me was that of David. David was squeezed into Saul's armor, and he was very uncomfortable with that. I felt a bit like that when I started leading. God said, no, you don't have to put somebody else's armor on. You can be you and lead in your own way, and I will lead you along that way. So we did that, learned lots of lessons the hard way, but that seems to often be the way. And then after 5 years, God called us to go back to the Netherlands. So I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a minute, but I think the key thing that I wanted to draw out with you is people. Where does it start with people? If we want to plant hundreds of churches in Europe and beyond the rest of the world, we're going to need to become really good at helping raising up and growing people. So a few things that I learned from my story was making yourself available. You don't need to be much special, but you do need to say yes to God. It's learning how to hear God's voice. Actually, when we make ourselves available, we want to be guided. And if we learn how to obey into what God has called us to, then he will also send us in the right direction. We need to learn how to be faithful. When we have been given little, let's do the little well. And then maybe God will give you more. And then the fourth one is actually we need to find spiritual mothers and fathers that we can learn from and hear their advice, follow their example, and learn to step into their footsteps. So my question to you is, what elements have been crucial in your development, and what strategies have you got in place in the places where you lead to bring up new people, to grow new people? So first of all, look at what's been important in your life, and then how can you replicate that and create opportunities for other people around you to do the same. So it's after lunch. I thought we're going to make this a bit interactive to keep you awake and on your toes. You're going to get 5 minutes to chat that through together, and then we'll bring it back in and hear what you've learned from your conversations. Okay? So maybe groups of 3 or 4. First question, what has been instrumental in your own growing as a leader? Second question, how can you replicate that and help raise up new leaders where you are? Invest in people. Okay? Over to you. Maybe 3s and 4s. Maybe mix it up a little bit. Maybe some people that you normally haven't chatted to, or maybe moved across different areas of the room. Feel free to mix it up a bit. We'll try and bring it back in again. We'll do a little bit of feedback just to hear what you've been chatting through in your groups, and then we'll continue from there. So, first question, what has been the thing that you have valued most in growing as a leader yourself? Maybe a couple of people giving some feedback. If you can wave, we'll bring a microphone to you. And then, oh, you're getting volunteered already. That's great.
Okay. For me, one of the main things was being given a seat at the table, and for someone to make the time to create that table, but also not in a false way where I was just listened to and, oh, well done, you're a younger leader, good idea, but actually they championed me, and although they didn't agree with all my ideas, they said, let's try it, let's go for it. So it was just being listened to and heard, and I think for me to replicate that to others, and it will be uncomfortable, and I will learn a lot about how I was as a younger leader, I'm sure. So,
yeah. So, I mean, who would agree with that? Being invited to give a seat at the table. Who's experienced that? Yeah, that's where it starts, isn't it? Yeah. Right. Any other things?
One of the great things I learned from my past, but also helped me a lot, is being honest to myself. I don't have to be perfect. I just give what I have, like the little boy who gave his lunch package. And the Lord makes it big. I can't do that.
No.
And being honest about that, not trying to be perfect, but just, be who you are and be honest about your mistakes and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Helped me a lot.
Yeah. Bring what you've got. Yeah. Any other things?
I think for me, it's recognizing that stuff you learn in other jobs, you can bring into church leadership. So it's not all just about what have I learned from another pastor or what have I learned from this. But actually you learn so much in all avenues of life that you can bring into the job.
Yeah. Yeah, the whole of life is a classroom, isn't it? One more?
I just wanted to endorse what the first person said. I went on the Regions Beyond Leadership School for 2 years, and would never in a million years have volunteered for that or put myself forward for that. But Simon from Biggin Hill was having dinner with us, and he said, "Why don't you go on that, Sue?" And I really wanted to, and because he said that, I did, and absolutely loved it. But I needed someone to give me the confidence and to spot that perhaps I could, very much so.
Brilliant. Just somebody to believe in you, right? Yeah. I think we can all see our own flaws pretty well. Having somebody who can say, "Hey, I see something more than your flaws," really helps you draw out, isn't it? So what are you doing to intentionally invest in people in your context? Give us a few examples. Just raise your hand if you got something.
There's some guy who stood up a couple of months ago and he said, "Can you please disciple me?" So I give every 2 weeks, one evening, to spend time with him, to pray with him, and to help him to erect and to recognize his leadership skills and gifts that God put it in him.
Yeah, amazing. Investing your personal time. There's another one here. Same? Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I think hearing people's dreams is a really key thing. So, when you're spending time with people and you're walking with them and you're hearing what their dreams are, and often when they've not maybe had a leadership position before or they've not done anything in church, it's like hearing them and kind of calling that out of them, that they can go further.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great question, isn't it? What are your dreams? Pay careful attention, see what comes. Yeah. Right, one more.
One of the things I'm doing at the moment is, as leading the worship in our church, I've got someone in the team that I'm wanting to be able to come into leadership. And so at rehearsal, we spend the first 30 minutes in worship.
Yeah.
So I'm letting that person actually lead the worship in that time of safety with the team before they ever end up leading worship in front of the church.
Yeah.
And I think it seems to be working really well.
Yeah. Yeah. It's creating a safe context for people having a go. Beautiful. So, we can talk about this for a very long time, and there's so many ways of doing this, isn't it? You could have official courses happening. You could do it all informally. Does depend a little bit on what type of church you are. New Frontiers, we've never been a methods-driven movement. It's always been principles. So I trust you can outwork those where you are. But the most important thing is, how are you investing intentionally into these things? Are you waiting for sort of it to happen on the go, or are you really sitting down with the team saying, "Hey, what are we doing to develop this, and what would fit with us?" Maybe some other context you could learn from to invite. I would really encourage you to think about that. If we want to plant hundreds of churches, we're going to need to raise up hundreds of people, not just a few. So, and you can involve everyone in your church to be part of this. So imagine you had a bit of an apprentice model where everyone was to invest in one person to train them in the very thing that they're good at. Imagine what would happen to the church, right? It would multiply as we went. And my prayer is that we will have many people that will follow your examples and be sent out all over the world We're going to be generous with people. Sometimes when you have trained them up, it's a little bit hard to let them go. But we wouldn't be here if somebody hadn't invested in us and then send us on our way. I think one of the most generous things we can do is give our best people away to the mission of God and see what could happen with just a few people that have got your DNA and taken it to places you could never go. I mean, that would be something that God will have called all of us for. We'll move on to the second part. So next to people, I think it's also important to develop sort of an apostolic mindset, a vision, and some prophetic guidance in that. So I just want to talk with you for a minute about what that looks like for us in relational mission, and I'm sure you will have your sort of own equivalents, but hopefully it will sort of resonate with you. So these are all the churches that are located in the Netherlands. As you're visiting, I thought that might be quite helpful to know. These are all the different spheres they're part of, where they're located. The big green dots are places where we're dreaming of planting new churches. There's 12 districts in the Netherlands where we would love to see at least one multiplying church in all of these districts. And there are quite a few churches already. We want to bring those together to work together. And for us, we've been dreaming about what does it look like, because actually the Netherlands is part of a much bigger whole. So I think when we're looking at a foundation, apostolic foundation for church planting, we're actually thinking, what could we collectively do as a movement, and how could we bring others in that together? And most of the time, it's very helpful to base that on prophetic guidance, because we can all sit behind our desk and come up with a nice plan to take over the world. But that's not how God usually does that. He starts with giving us direction and bringing us into what He is already doing. So for us at Relational Mission, we've received a prophetic word that we would do in 20 years what many other families of churches would see happen in maybe 50 years. So we kind of started dreaming about it and thought, okay, if we just dream about that a little bit boldly, what could that look like? And we kind of set 3 goals, and one's particularly for sort of worldwide, one specific for the UK, and the other one specific for Europe. And we kind of put some timelines against those just to kind of give ourselves a little bit of a task to work that out. I'm not sure God's going to nicely fit in our timeline, but we'll make a daring attempt to put it on paper. So our first part of the vision is to plant 5 multiplying hubs in each of the continents of the world. I think having a little bit of presence in each of these places will then allow things to grow from there. So that's our goal for 2030. We're well on the way, so it's not too far off, but we're seeing movements happen. We're seeing people moving to parts of the world where we've never been involved, and that's very exciting to see. Next to that, we've kind of set a goal, particularly for multiplication in the UK. That's where probably most of our churches are based, and we've been dreaming about what that could look like. So we set the goal to plant 100 churches, to see 100 churches in the UK in the next 20 years. So that is quite a big step up. It means that everything needs to multiply. So we've been thinking about how to raise up men and women, how to resource that, how to send people out. And then we've been dreaming about what that could look like for Europe. And we believe that there's a lot of work to be done in Europe. So we're dreaming about planting 20 churches in each of the 50 nations of Europe. If you add that up, that kind of makes up for about 1,000 churches, which is a little scary. But 20 churches just in each country doesn't seem to be all that much, right? I mean, there's nearly 20 in the Netherlands, and most people have never heard of New Frontiers in the Netherlands. So there's still much work to be done. So this is just us trying to put bravely some sort of specifics to it. Because somehow if you make some specific goals, it does help you to think about, okay, what could that look like? You sort of make yourself a bit accountable. And who knows, we might reach 2050 and only half of that has happened. Hey, that's fine. I mean, we'll have stayed much more advanced than maybe we would have if we'd never set any goals. So I'm sure you will have sort of your own equivalent of what you're dreaming about, what you're thinking about. But the most important thing that I want to draw out from this is to actually have an apostolic and a prophetic foundation for your strategy. And this is where I think the apostolic and the prophetic work together. Now, I want to unpack that just a little bit more. So in Ephesians 2, I mean, you all know this. You know that it's described that the church is built on the foundations of apostles and prophets. Now, for a long time, people have considered that to be the New Testament apostles and the Old Testament prophets. But it's sort of strange that it's mentioned in that order, because if it was just talking about Old Testament and New Testament, it should have been mentioned in the reverse order. It would have been on the foundations of the prophets and the apostles, not of the apostles and the prophets. When we then read on a little bit further in Ephesians, we can see that clearly the giftings that the Spirit gives to the church still involves apostles and prophets. And when we then read in 1 Corinthians 12, verse 28, it says, "And God has placed in the church, first of all apostles, second prophets, third teachers, then miracles, then gifts of healing, of helping, of guidance, and of different kinds of tongues." He's not talking about gifts that have happened. These are gifts that are still happening. Now, I'm preaching here to the converted because you all come from the same heritage, but this is quite a unique heritage that not many denominations would hold. And it's bringing the apostolic strategy and the prophetic guidance together that brings a real unique entry point for us when it comes to church planting. So what do we mean by sort of apostolic initiative and prophetic direction? I think we can talk about this in conceptual ideas, but I just want to talk about what it meant for us. So first of all, being part of an apostolic family is what has grown me over the years. I was in Norwich with a leader called Goff Hope, and what he would used to do, very clever, he would take me on all his trips. And I would be the person who would be getting the sandwiches ready and pouring people's coffees and clearing up the chairs afterwards. He made me do all the hard work, but as a gift in return, I could be present everywhere he went. So I was a little coffee boy and learning how to serve. But he took me into apostolic context to understand something of the bigger picture. And at the time, I didn't really realize it, but it really shaped me. I was listening into the talks, I was listening to people having conversations over coffee, and it started drawing me out of what was happening. My vision started to expand from my own little sort of gap year to what was happening around the country, around the world, and that's been a bit of a theme that's happened for me all the way through. People taking me on trips, putting me in context that I was totally unfamiliar with, and that in me started to birth something, catching hold of something that was tangible, not just something that you read in a book, not just something you hear in a Bible study, but something that you can see outworked in real life. I think even the fact that you're having your apostolic gathering here in the Netherlands is very profound, actually making a statement. There's people that will come and have dinner tonight from this church that will have never been in an apostolic context before. They won't have a clue. We just started a church. I have 4 families in my church that know what an apostolic family looks like. All the other 50 that have joined since have no idea. I'm spending ages to try and explain what I mean, but unless it's visible, people won't really catch it. So it's very important to think, how could we create context in which people can taste something of the apostolic nature of what we're doing together? How could you expose them to the things that already happen? Sharing stories of church planting, sending out teams to go and serve in different places, bringing people to gatherings. Man, we spend so much money in trying to bring people to gatherings, paying for tickets, but hey, unless you bring them in, they won't be able to see it or understand it or hear it, because an apostolic context is a relational context. It's not a hypothetical context. It's not sort of a membership that you have. And there is almost no other context in which people could receive some of that. I've also noticed that every time that I am present at an apostolic gathering like this, something happens in the prophetic. I don't know if you noticed, but apostles and prophets always work together. And it's always the prophets that get released first in an apostolic context. That's why when you're gathering a group of leaders like this, you will always see the prophetic flowing in ways that you would never really just see it in your own prayer meeting at your local church. There's something that's unlocked on a strategic level that is multiplied when you come together. And it's in those places that I have received prophetic words that have really shaped a lot of my life, learning how to take next steps. It's always in these conferences or moments where leaders come together. And I always thought, why does it always have to be conferences? Why is it always sort of these big moments? But I don't know, there is something about the apostolic gathering of people that releases the word of God into people's lives. And I want to encourage you, come with expectation. I mean, when there's moments of prayer and ministry, I would always be the one just to run up to the front. I was the young crazy guy who just got everyone to pray for him, because I believe in the context of prayer and apostolic gathering, the prophetic is released, and that is something that I'm still living with today. I'm still living with promises that have been given to me that I still long to see worked out. Now, most of the time, I don't really fully understand it when I receive it. That's why I write it down, and then over the years, I start to see what it actually looks like. So for us, I was telling you that I did a gap year in the UK starting off, then went to Peterborough, and God said, one day I will call you back to your nation, and I'll make it abundantly clear. The prophetic word I received was that you will receive a call from across the waters that says, come over and help us. So for about 13 years, I lived with this word. I mean, sometimes you live with words for a very long time. You sort of put them in the cupboard, and you kind of almost forget about them. And then God does something, and all of a sudden, bam, it's time. So I sat in a context with some Dutch leaders. They had asked me to come and help them with some of their church developments. And one of the guys doesn't even speak English. Halfway through the conversation, suddenly in English says to me, please come over and help us. I just sat up in my chair like stung by a bee. Like, I've heard those words before. Hang on. I was going to my book cupboard trying to dig out the prophetic word. Yes, there it is. Could this be? I mean, it felt so unprofound. I was thinking, this can't be it, right? Yeah, I've lived with this word for 30 years. This is it. So I started praying about it. Saying, God, is this you speaking? What's happening? So same week, we're driving in our car, and my daughter looks out the window. We had just moved house in the UK, and she hates moving house. And she said to me, I feel God just saying to me, next time we're going to move house, I think we're going to move to the Netherlands. I was like, what? We just survived one move. I don't want to move again. We just bought a house. We've been waiting for a long time. So, okay, maybe God is doing something here. Then we came back to the UK, and I get a phone call from one of our apostolic leaders, Maurice Nightingale. Some of you will know him. And he said, we've been talking about the Netherlands for the last 13 years, and I've always been patient with you, but I feel God saying, now's your time. I think with some urgency, I want you to consider planting a church in the Netherlands. I thought, okay, this is starting to come together. Then I get a prophetic word from the worship leader in our church, and he says, I've got a word for you. I don't really want to give it to you because I think I know what it means. He says, I see you going on a ship across the waters to the Netherlands, and it's sort of heavy raining, and I feel God's opening up an apostolic door for you in the Netherlands. But I don't really want to tell you because I think it might mean that you'll be moving on. And then you bring all of these words together and you think, wow, now I've got confidence. This is just not a great idea I've cooked up behind my own desk. This is God speaking. He's bringing all the little loose ends together, and now something is unleashed. Now, I think then comes the big steps. Like you have to give up your job, move your whole family, go and plant somewhere, leave everything behind. How are we going to do that? But when you have heard, this is it. It gives you confidence. I'm sure you will recognize a lot of these things in your own life. There have been moments where God has brought apostolic opportunity with prophetic guidance together and opened a door. And I think if we want to see church planting released, particularly in Europe, we really need to bring these two things together. Now, there's church planting that happens because churches grow, and that's wonderful. We have accidental church plants happen when people just relocate jobs and get a job somewhere else, and it just happens, which is beautiful. Sometimes we have church plants that happen where people are sort of being sent out to strategic places. And I think it's that sort of third part that we need a lot more of when we're going to think about planting strategically into Europe. If we're just going to plant churches where there's already churches, we're going to end up with 1 million churches in the UK, but none in Europe. Because we need to see breakthrough in places where we have no connection, where you might never end up yourself. We're going to need something more than just accidental and growth planting. We also need apostolic mission and ministry. And this is where the apostolic and the prophetic, I think, are very important to work together. So creating context in which you gather people, hearing God together, and taking some steps. I mean, it already happened this morning with some of the countries that were being mentioned. But really getting hold of something and saying, we're not going to let go of this country, we're going to pray this one through until we see somebody released, is what's going to be required if we want to reach Europe. There is almost like an added level of tenacity needed to see some breakthrough in Europe. Europe is such a spiritual desert. I mean, you have one church in Europe, and that is amazing. But wouldn't it be fantastic if you had churches all over? I believe that the Netherlands is going to be a bridgehead into the rest of Europe. That's why so much is happening in the Netherlands. And I believe you have already got your foot on the ground. There is one here, and I believe that there'll be many more to come. Smith Wigglesworth prophesied that there would be a big move coming from God by the Spirit, and it would start in the UK, it would overflow, it would go to Europe, and then the rest of the world. And I believe that we are part of that wave. I mean, we have seen lots of fruit in the UK already. We are seeing some fruit starting to happen in the Netherlands. I believe this is a stepping stone towards the rest of Europe. And if we're going to take very seriously the things that God has already given to us and steward it well, there will be more. Right, I think I've chatted enough after lunch for this one. I'm going to put the question back into your hands. What context do you have apostolically together when it comes to thinking about multiplication, particularly in Europe? And secondly, what prophetic words do you carry that you think are still valid for today and that you want to press into for this coming season? Is that okay? So apostolic opportunity and prophetic guidance. You all look like you're on your after lunch dip, so I'm going to quickly hand over, chat that through, and then we'll bring it back in. Yeah? All right. Let's bring it back in. I'm keen to hear some suggestions on how you can help your church to catch up into the apostolic context. What does that look like? What does it look like to bring your church experientially into an apostolic context? Just a minute. I'll catch your question.
I think something we've always done as a church is, so we've just come back from 2 years in South Africa, and in a very rural context, very poor context, and most of these people are never going to leave their hometown ever. So I think what we have always been intentional on doing is giving updates of what's happening around the world, and then after those updates, encouraging our people to pray. So and letting them know that their prayers have impact in these places around the world. So even if they never leave their hometown, that actually they can impact the nations even from their small little towns.
That's beautiful, isn't it? From your own sleepy little town, you can do world mission. Yeah. Any other ways in which you feel being caught up in the apostolic?
Well, we were just talking in our group about, the importance of, I guess it fits in with the, some of the prophecies we've had, like the fragrance of Jesus thing. It's very easy to think just New Frontiers or just Regions Beyond, isn't it? It's very important that we become aware of what other movements are going on. It's like particularly, say, in Eastern Europe, I'm sure there's lots of apostolic, charismatic movements that we don't even know about. And, the importance of sort of, collaborating with these other movements, and our apostle was collaborating with other apostles in other parts of Europe and stuff like that, so that we can learn how to support one another and how to work together, and
Very good.
And maybe the prophetic guidance can help us to know how to do that, or how to go about that process.
Yeah. So, there's opportunity to bring people into an apostolic context, But if you're struggling to do that, you can also bring the apostolic context into your people. So if you can't take 20 people to a conference, then just bring one person to come to your church and actually share something of what's happening, invite church planters, invite apostolic leaders to come and share something. So people will put it to more than just a name on a banner or a website, actually put faces to people's names and get to know people. I think very, very important. So what would you say would be one or two key prophetic words that you feel God has given you, maybe for this context, just specifically for Europe, that you live with? I'm keen to hear.
Picture I got is, and I have it already for a couple of years. It started with me when I was in Canterbury, in this little chapel. It was halfway underground. And God showed me that there is so much seed in the ground in Europe. They've been sowing for years. And then the modern world put a layer of concrete or whatever over it. It's the secular world. And it wants to come up and sort of using the cracks where little plants can grow up and then become bigger and wider, and the crack becomes bigger. But with little groups, and I think with little steps in the European cities where they have been sowing for many ages.
Yeah.
So,
yeah,
little flowers coming up,
brilliant.
Going in little groups.
Yeah.
So don't be discouraged if you're just a little group. I think that's the power.
Yeah, yeah, good. Any others?
Like 20 years ago, somebody said, you should go to Latvia with this youth outreach. I went there 10 years ago. And I got trained how to pray for people and to tell the gospel. And hundreds of people came to Christ. And I go every year now. And that's how I got a freedom here also to go out on the street in Utrecht and train others, bring new leaders in for train with Alpha course. So that's my story.
Yeah, brilliant. I don't know about you, but I think sometimes you go through seasons of prophetic clarity, right? There's seasons where God speaks really clearly, you get hold of it, you run with it, and then there's seasons where you're sort of, we've seen some of that, but what's next? And I think for us particularly in the Netherlands as Relational Mission, we've had lots of prophetic words from the past, but we were sort of getting a little bit at an impasse where it's like, well, what's true for now, for this season? And we felt we needed some fresh input. So what we started to do is actually bring apostolically minded leaders and apostolically minded prophets together to actually particularly pray into the situation into the Netherlands. So there's different levels of the prophetic. I mean, you have people who are very encouraging prophetically, but that doesn't always mean they're sort of thinking on an apostolic prophetic level. So there's people who are rubbish at prophetic personal encouragement, but they're great at prophesying over places and nations and those sort of things. So you bring those people into the right context, and together we started to pray, God, what would you do for us in this season? And some particular things came out of that. So first of all, particularly a burden to see places across all the 12 districts in the Netherlands being reached. So looking at which ones have we got presence in, which ones we don't. Not just for us, but also just around New Frontiers. And then we start to pray, so what is the next step, the next region that we feel God is opening up for us? And then particularly a friend of ours, Adrian Horner, some of you will know him, prophesied over Gelderland, releasing the horses or harnessing the horses in Gelderland. So we started to look around, and we had a sense of calling back to the Netherlands. We kind of paid attention to that word, Gelderland, and we started to look around. But there's already quite a few things happening in Gelderland. But there was one place that really stood out for us, and that was Nijmegen, because it's the only place in Gelderland that just sits sort of below the rivers. That's kind of a big presence. And it's in the Netherlands, the rivers sort of determine a border between Catholic south and a Protestant north. And in the Catholic south, it's pretty much a spiritual desert when it comes to church life. So we started looking at Nijmegen, and we kind of said, God, Why not? Why not Nijmegen? We looked in a place that's about 200,000 people, about 30% are students, so it's very multicultural city. And I mean, it's a desert. About 1% of the population goes to a church. I've visited many of those churches. I would say maybe 10% of those still preach the gospel. I mean, that's maybe 1,000 people in one city. I mean, there's a lot of work to be done there. But we didn't want to just plunge into something. We started praying, okay, God, if you're in this, we need some more clarity. And then we just had 3 or 4 months. I mean, God never seems to be quick on these things. But 3 or 4 months where like there were little puzzle pieces coming together. So somebody shared with us a word about an old city. Then somebody shared a word with us about a logo with birds. Then somebody shared a word with us about a big group of people all walking together. Then we had 2 prophetic words were about route. So one's from the north to the south, the other one's from the east to the west. And it crosses over at Nijmegen, which happens to be the oldest city in the Netherlands, has a logo with 2 birds in it, and is the proud host of the Nijmeegse Vierdaagse, which is like a 4-day hiking event, a big European hiking event. And bit by bit, all these puzzle pieces come together like, yeah, I think something's growing here. I think we then started to actually bring the people that we started to connect with to Nijmegen on the ground. I mean, we'd never been to Nijmegen before, so we thought, why on earth should we go to Nijmegen? But actually, as soon as we set our foot on the ground, we started to do some prayer walks through the city, bring people together. We felt something started to open up. And I think when you bring apostolic intention and prophetic guidance together, it's a very powerful tool in opening up new areas. So I want to encourage you. I mean, the fact that you are here, I think, is very, very profound. This is a statement. The fact that you have one church in the Netherlands, but you choose to have your conference here, is a big statement. That takes a lot of resources and energy to bring people to. But I really believe that that is profound. There will be a real impact because you're making a statement of intent. And I want to encourage you to start thinking, where do you have opportunity? Where do you have apostolic-minded people already? Where can you bring prophetically apostolic people together to start really praying into and prophesying into specific places? So maybe even some of the regions that you've just written down. How can you bring a little team together just to specifically start praying for these things and seeking God for his guidance? I believe God will open doors in an intentional process like that he wouldn't do just at one church prayer meeting at a spontaneous moment. Right, let me be a little bit Dutch with you and talk about resources. Is that okay? Yeah? Here we go, resources. Now, to plant churches, we need people, we need clear God guidance, but we also need resources. And the Dutch like to be quite practical about things. I'm just going to be really practical with you for a moment. How can you resource church plants in a way that will really accelerate God's kingdom? Often the church planting model that happens in our context is people they go find a full-time job somewhere, they go and plant a church next to it, and that's wonderful. We need loads more of those. But it's also quite a slow process. So I think there's more models than just that. How could we release people to make a flying start? How could we release people to do bivocational ministry or full-time ministry even? I think all of these things need some thinking through. And when you start to talk about resources, you very quickly start to hear all sorts of different philosophies, right? Just ask one person, how do you think we should resource church plants? I can guarantee you'll get 5 different answers when you ask 5 different people. Now, it's quite helpful to go back to the Bible. What does the Bible say about resources? I want to dig out 5 models that seem to be used in the Bible. And see what we can learn from those. I'll really quickly touch on them. If you want to dig in deeper, you'll just have to do that in your own time, but I'll give you the Bible verses to do that, yeah? So first of all, we can see that Acts 13, Paul and Barnabas are set apart and sent out by their local church in Antioch. So here we can see a model where a local church is funding a cross-cultural ministry into new places. So they're setting people apart, they're sending them, and they're resourcing them. So that's one thing. One church releasing people to go and minister. The second one we can see in Philippians 4 is when Paul has planted a church, he brings that church into an apostolic mission, and actually they start contributing to the mission that Paul has wider than their local support. So this is where he starts to draw churches together to start and reach other regions. So this is a network of churches that are starting to work together. This is Paul. I mean, you can read it through a lot of the letters where Paul actually rallies them to together invest into the work that God is doing through his ministry. The third one is that we can see Paul very specifically actually asks for resources. He does fundraising. There's moments where there's needs, and he gets out and he says, come on, we need your help. There's specific requests that he will give to churches. I mean, you can read that in Romans 15, verse 26, 2 Corinthians 8. I mean, all sorts of places where he specifically asks people to help invest. Fourth, now this one may make you feel a little bit uncomfortable. Jesus' model of resourcing his ministry. Did you ever dig into this? He traveled around with sugar aunties. They paid for most of his ministry, rich women. Could you imagine some of your apostles? Yeah, this is my team. Here's a couple of rich women that travel with me everywhere. They pay for the bills. That's not really something that we are very used to, is it? We need some more sugar aunties in apostolic ministry, right? I'll just leave that one with you. Luke 8, verse 3. It's biblical. Fifth one, tent making. So we can also see where it's inappropriate to draw from people's resources, or there's very limited on the ground. Paul resorts to tent making. So he actually gets a job, and through his job, he starts to multiply. Again, a very valid form of ministry. When then there's others that come and join Paul, we can see that they start to do the tent making, and he's then released to go and minister to people. So actually other people coming to join you, to release you, is also a model. So those are just 5. I mean, I'm sure when you dig through, you can find a few more, but these are always. Now, you can start to debate which one should we use. If they're all 5 of them mentioned in the Bible, we should use all 5 of them. My philosophy would be, by all means, we should resource church planting. Not one, not the other. So don't debate about it. Just get on with it and see what it is that you could do to invest into the kingdom together. Now, a really big thing that often happens in Christian circles, and I do want to just try and throw a grenade into this one, just for a minute, if you don't mind, is should we ask for money or should we not ask for money? Right? This can get very heated debate. Should you actually approach people and say, could you help me fund this? Or should we just go into our inner room and pray for God to provide for the bills? I mean, we can see through church history all sorts of people who have had different approaches, right? I mean, we all have read the biographies and we've seen some real faith heroes of people who never asked for money. So George Muller, I'm sure you've read his biography, very famous for praying that God will provide, and then God did. Amazingly. He did have a ministry that went worldwide in the news, so people didn't know about it, but he never asked, and God provided. But then we see also people that asked all sorts of people and saw amazing things happen, and therefore ministry resourced. So should we ask, or should we not ask? Well, in the Bible, there's a very helpful passage on this. You can read it in your own time, but it's 1 Kings 17. And it's the story of Elijah. And Elijah ends up, after, quite an intense conflict, he's then pretty much depressed, and he sits next to a brook of water. And God sends him ravens every day to bring him food. There were no human hands involved in resourcing him, right? God provided for him. And then the brook dried up. And then he had to move on. And God told him to go to a widow. Now, this is outrageous. He was to go to the widow and he was to ask her for her last piece of bread. Now, this is outrageous fundraising, right? I mean, a widow, hardly a sugar auntie. Go and ask her for her last piece of bread. Taking it would mean that she and her son would die. That's sort of bold fundraising, isn't it? I know you only have one piece of bread, but I need it for the kingdom, for myself. And if you give it to me, God will provide for you. And that's exactly what God did. Now, it was through his request to this widow's last piece of bread that both he and her were provided for. This wasn't mean. This was faith. So he had to go and ask somebody for their last bit of money, and God multiplied his work through that. Now, in the West, we get a little uncomfortable about that, right? So when we were raising funds for the church plant, we just thought for a minute, what if we just not think about what's doable, just think, what would we need to do this well? We just started to tot it up. Imagine we want to release a full-time leader in one go. Imagine we'd grow from 0 to 50 people in 1 year. Imagine we would do ministry. Imagine we would give to the poor. Imagine we start giving a tithe straight away. Imagine we would set people aside to do some training. If we add all of that up, how much money would we need? Now, the Netherlands is a very expensive place. About 140,000 euros we discovered it would take to do all of that and do it well. So we thought, okay, everyone said, you're crazy. And we said, well, actually, maybe we should put it in God's hands. Maybe this is not such a crazy idea. I mean, look at how much money there's around in the Netherlands. There should be plenty of money around in the Netherlands to resource mission and ministry like that. So we started praying and said, okay, God, if we want to have our cake and eat it, this is what we need. And now we're going to try and resource this by all means possible. So we're going to pray like crazy, and we're going to ask people everywhere for their last piece of bread and see what happens. So we did that. We gave ourselves to that. So our vision was to rally churches across the UK to invest in ministry in the Netherlands. We went around the different churches in the Netherlands who were already there, not even part of our sphere, and said, we're going to invest in the Netherlands. I'm sure you'll be excited to hear that. Who would like to invest with us? And then I did a personal fundraising course with the navigators. I can tell you it was the most uncomfortable training I've done in my whole Christian life. It was about Christian fundraising. They did a phenomenal job teaching really good biblical values on giving and stewardship. And they also taught you how to approach people and ask them for their last piece of bread. And then they made you make a list of all the people that you were going to contact, and they made you contact them. You had to practice your little conversation with them. You had to learn how to approach them and what to ask for and how to listen to the Holy Spirit during that process. Man alive, I felt so uncomfortable. And yet God started to do something very, very special for it. Now, let's see, I've got a slide here somewhere. So this is what we sort of broke down it would cost. I'd had all sorts of people arguing with me that was outrageous. I said, I don't mind. That's what we think it costs. And if God's in it, then he can prove himself. And then we started doing the work. And then this is what happened. Basically, we gathered a big group, about a quarter or so, of personal supporters, just people that we knew. All my sugar aunties and uncles and friends. And we approached them, say, would you invest with us? We're going to try and put a church together. It'll be self-sufficient in 3 years, but for those 3 years, we're looking for support. Would you help us on a monthly basis? We're looking for people to give 100, 150, 200 euros a month. Who would be up for it? Surprising, I got some very rude no's and some very surprising yeses. Then we went around and we went to our team. We said, well, we can't ask people for money if we're not investing it ourselves. So we put a big chunk of our own savings and giving in to lead by example. So that's the Novio church plant team leading the way. We went to 11 churches in the UK and said, we need 11 churches to all give £2,000 pounds into this. Who would be up for it? And we found 11 churches that wanted to do that. Then we went to the Dutch churches and then even did some funding application. I mean, you never know. And lo and behold, we had more than 140,000 come in for a first year. If you do something that you believe in, people will be willing to invest. Now, you may need to throw the net wide, but God can easily resource his mission. All we need to do is give people opportunity, create some clear vision and expectation, and then invite people. Now, you don't have to force them. If they don't want to, they don't want to. But if you've never given them the opportunity, how will you know? So, lesson learned, resource by all means possible. Go for it. Think creatively. What could it look like? If you want to release people, how could you rally what you already have? Now, I had people argue with me and they said, you're never going to make it. This is never going to work. So it's fine. We'll allow God to prove himself. If he's not in it, I'll find a part-time job. Fine, I don't mind. But I'm first going to try, and then we'll see. We had our first year. We paid all the bills. God's provided all the gifts. Now we're on to year 2. I won't bore you with the statistics on that one. But I think God can do. I've seen God multiply resources in ways I could never imagine. Now, what would be the key thing that is required to multiply resources? I've just given you the strategy. But I would say the key thing that's required is faith. Faith for money. And funny enough, in the West, we tend to be a bit funny about this. We have faith for a lot of things, but not always for money. I think the only way to grow faith for money is personally. You have to obey. So on the first day that we went to look for a house in the Netherlands, God told us, I do not want you to rely on your own money. I want you to give away all your savings, and I want you to trust me that I will give you a house that you could never afford yourself. So I had a little conversation with God. So this is a really bad time to give away all my savings, God. I'm about to emigrate my family with 4 kids to another country, a very expensive country, might I add to that. And God said, do you trust me? So first visit we did for the first house, we gave away all our savings. Somebody else was buying a house that needed it, and we said, all right, here we go. And then we started looking, and it took forever. We took months looking around, nothing happened. We moved to the Netherlands, we didn't find a house, and we said, well, if we haven't found a house by the time we move, then we're just going to have to rent something. We came to Nijmegen, turns out renting is even harder than buying. So we moved from one Airbnb to the next for about 4 months. It was terrible, I can tell you. We looked at 25 different houses, and every time we said, God, come and open this door. And then I had a dream about a house that was bigger on the inside than it was on the outside. It had some older people living next door, but they were moving. It had a little bit of water next to it, and if the kids went to swim in it, they were afraid that they were going to get sick. And it costed way more than we had. But when we were going to make an offer for this house, all sorts of people start to come through the doors with money. Now I thought, is this pizza? Is this God? I don't really know. I just wrote it down. And then the 25th house that I went to look at was a house, and it had 3 levels, but the third one was below the ground, so you couldn't see it from the outside. I came in, this guy was saying, yeah, it's a really nice neighborhood. There's an older couple that lives next door, but they've just moved. And I was like, oh, okay. So, and then I wander a bit further out in the street, and there's a bit of water, and it has a big yellow sign in it. It's middle of the summer. It says, watch out, blue algae, don't swim. Maybe it's not pizza. So I asked him, what does it cost? Well, I think it was like 80,000 euros above our budget or something like that. It's like, okay, God, if you're in this, you're going to have to do something, because I can't make a bid if I don't have money for it. I have faith, but not stupid. So we prayed, and then I said, God, you're going to have to give us a sign. So following day, there's friends of ours says, we've heard about your story, and we just sold our house. We want to give a tithe from what we made from the house. I want to give it to you. It's 12,000 euros. Would you like to have it? I said, let me have a think about it. Oh, yes, no, it's fine. Yeah, good. And then we started praying, said, okay, God, this is still not enough, but clearly you're in this. So we threw the net out wide. We send letters to our family and friends in our church and says, we believe God's in this. Who would like to help us? Within 3 days, we had 100,000 euros that came in. And we were able to get this house, buy it. I mean, it's an absolute, if ever you're around Nijmegen, you can come have a cup of coffee, and we'll thank God together for doing an outrageous work. I mean, when you trust God, personally, put your faith in him, he will come through. And this is just one story. I could tell you another 5 of these. But if you learn how to obey God in the little, he'll give you more. And he has plenty of resources to supply his ministry. That's not the problem. He's looking for people of faith to bring the resources to. Right, enough said over resources. We have a few minutes left. Let me just talk about strategy for a minute. Some people don't like the word strategy, but it is quite handy to think about, if you're going to plant a church, how will you do it? I can just tell you a bit of our story. I don't think there's one strategy. I think there's 100 strategies to plant churches. You just need to pick one and run with it.
and ask God to give you clear direction on the way. So for us, I think the prophetic word that came was first people, then place, then strategy. So that's where we started. We started gathering people, started to look out who's sort of similar-minded, who has got any vague connections to the Netherlands, and we just started to chat to them, see what happened. We didn't ask anyone, but we did start making connections. Then we started to get a few people that started to resonate, and we invited them to come with us for a week. We paid for a holiday home and said, come, let's put feet on the ground, come and stay with us in a holiday home for a week. If we're still friends after a week, then maybe God's opening something up. Apparently worked out because all the couples that actually came with us. Even when one couple came and they said, just so you know, we like you, but we're never going to move to Nijmegen. A year later, they're now living in Nijmegen, and God clearly had other plans. But just bring people together in places of faith where you can pray together. We started prayer walking the city and see what God might do. And in that context, God started to do something. Now, the problem is, if you're planting into a place where you have no connections or very little presence, you do need to have some visibility that you wouldn't have just through the relational mechanisms. So we put up a website together. So this was the team that we gathered. So we didn't know what we were going to call the church, so we just called it Plant Nijmegen, and we put a good website together. If you're going to spend any money on anything, spend money on a website. This is where people go and find a church. When they move into a place, they don't go and ask around what good churches are around, because most people don't know any Christians. They'll go to Google, and they ask Google, which good church should I go to? Well, we may as well pay Google a bit of money to point them to us if we're investing into something we think is worthwhile. So if there was anything you were going to spend money on, spend it on there. And most of the people that went there, we just did a little blog telling our story. We put our values of what was important to us. We had no idea what it was going to look like, but we just wanted people to know what flavor they were getting and where to find us. And we had all sorts of people coming in. I just had a little sneaky sort of contact box where you could sign up, and this is sign up for our newsletter. And every person who signed up for our newsletter, I send an email and say, hey, I saw you signed up to our newsletter. Would you like to do a Zoom call with me? Just being a bit rude and a bit Dutch. No one said no. All of them did. I had a few awkward Zoom calls, but I think a lot of people actually then made the connection. So then they came. I mean, we started organizing some events when we put our feet on the ground. We had a very awkward first picnic in the park. We had like 25 people who had never met each other before. Trying to introduce them all at once to one another was very awkward, but it worked. We did start having food together, hang out together, pray together, and that's where things start to happen. Now, some of these turned out to be a little weird, and they drifted off, but most of those are still with us today, and it's just a way to get started. So, people, visibility, prayer, mobilizing prayer. If you want to plant into Europe, you're going to have to rally more than resources, more than money. You're really going to have to rally prayer. And I would almost do it like you would do a personal fundraiser, but a personal fundraiser for prayer. Make sure that you rally people to become part of your prayer team. So we just put this WhatsApp group together. We did regular updates, prayer letters, updates, and tried to rally as much as we could. Everywhere we spoke about the church plant, we took time to pray specifically that God would prepare the ground. I mean, Europe is such a tough place. Prayer is needed even more than money. And then we landed, we started connecting people, we started visiting different churches so we could make connections. In January, we started meeting in our living room. Here's a few pictures, landing our little team together. Our first awkward picnic, our first prayer evening, and then we started meeting with people in our living room. Very fun. I think people just come. Some people don't like living rooms, but it's a good place to start. And then one fateful Sunday, we had about 40 people squeezed into our little living room together, almost no space to breathe. And then we decided, okay, we may need to start doing something differently. So we started looking for another place to rent. So we had to explain to our neighbors what was happening on Sunday morning because it was an awful lot of noise next door. They're coming to our open day in a few weeks' time to come and look for themselves, so that'll be fun. And then in May, we did our big launch. So we got everything together and built our website, got a nice branding together, and communicated it to people. And here we go. This is the church plant kicking off in Nijmegen. First time meeting together in a little place above a pub, sort of restaurant. It's very fun. And it's beautiful. I mean, the group of people is so multicultural. They come from all over the world. Our service is bilingual, English and Dutch, because we want to reach the internationals as well as the locals and bring them together for the kingdom. So if you want to know anything more, you want to keep up to date, you can use our snazzy QR code and sign up to our newsletter. Or if ever you're on a holiday, you'll be very welcome to come and visit. And hey, let's see what God's going to do on the adventure. But I pray that these adventures will multiply 100-fold in our nation and in the nations of Europe. Right, I've overused my time. It's time for coffee. I think the others have already finished up. I'm going to hand back over to you, Allard.